Good morning, all. This is Cheryl. This is the lesson that we talked about on pen and ink, and I just kind of wanted to review what we're going to be doing. Pen and ink is something that is really very, very versatile. It's a great adjunct to pencil if you want to do something different. It's great to do in your sketch pad, especially if you don't want to take a lot of pencils with you, and then you could always go back in and put either a watercolor wash over it. You could do pastel on top of it, a lot of different things just to kind of give it interest. So this is a lesson actually that my dad, Larry Castro, prepared on pen and ink, and I'm going to provide this to you because it's got lots of neat samples that you can work on at home. This is a great one to do, and you can tell a lot of this just by the amount of ink that you have, and the darkness of the lines or the heaviness of the lines really does allow you to determine where your values are coming from. One of the things that we're going to be doing today is this barn. And I wanted to start off by just sort of reminding you about how to draw your barn out. Get back to 2-point perspective again. You're going to draw your horizon line, which in this case, the barn is literally sitting right at the horizon line. And then you're going to do your box with the center of the box first. Putting your X in, putting on your height for your roof, and then putting your roof on itself. And then next of all, this is an add-on or lean-to type porch that's been added onto the barn. So I've drawn this out for you, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and do just a small sample of the different strokes that you can use to be able to shade that in. The one thing I did want to show you before I started, there's a number of pencils that are, or I should say graphite pens that are out there, not graphite, but pen and ink, and they come in many different shapes and sizes. This is actually a 2 millimeter, and you can tell what a nice thick width it has on it. These are some of my dad's old pens that he had. They go all the way from that to this would be what a 1 looks like. You can tell that one's got a little bit more ink in it. It goes to a 0.5. It actually goes all the way down to a 0.1. So depending on how you like pen and ink, these are not expensive pens to get. You may want to invest in looking at some different width of pens. It just might make your job a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this at the top where you can hopefully see what I'm working on. And I'm just going to kind of start in. Obviously my light is coming from the left side, and so you can see the cast shadow from the roof here. So I'm going to come in and just kind of start by putting in my roof. And notice, just like with our pencil, we can really vary and make it look interesting just by the amount of pressure that we're putting on the pen itself. Here's my actual pieces of tin themselves. That little bit of a split where the tin is, and then I can come back in. I'm going to make this corner just a little bit darker, but I find it's easier to start out by putting in your medium strokes first. And then you could always come back in and darken those strokes up. It's a lot easier to do that than to come in and try to do them really dark, and then you can't really change it because these are permanent markers. This is a 0.4 that I'm working with. And you notice I can do very light strokes. I can also do darker strokes. Now, that's kind of what I'm going to do on the tin for now. The next thing I'm going to do is kind of come in and start putting in this side of the barn over here. And I'm just going to go ahead. I know I've got that overhang of the roof on the other side, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in fairly strong. And then I'm going to have the same thing on my shed. And then I'm just going to kind of draw my lines in where things are going to be at. And then I'm going to go ahead at this point and put my door in so I don't forget that it's there. And I'm going to go ahead and show the lines. And I'm going to go a little bit dark with these lines because when I start my shading, I want to be able to tell where my boards are. And where the detail is. And again, I can always go back in and darken these up some if I need it. Now this is going to be fairly dark over here, but I'm going to go ahead, put my lines in, and then I can come and darken that later. Now the next thing I'm going to do is maybe come in and very lightly start adding just some light strokes in here to give the board some interest, make them look distressed. Notice that I'm going to leave the bottom of the barn uneven to kind of suggest grass, just kind of like you would do with pencil. And then what I'll plan to do is come on back in, going to be a little heavier with this, and start putting in that shadow. Now the neat thing is you don't have to go straight up and down. I love to do cross hatching. It sort of helps you to blend out the pen and ink. And then you could always go back in and make some of those strokes darker if you feel like you need to. Now underneath this roof, I'm going to kind of come in and I'm going to do the same thing. Here's my cast shadow. I'll go ahead and start darkening that up just a little bit underneath here. Really just kind of pulling the strokes down. Notice that I'm pulling down the same, I'm going parallel with the roof so that that cast shadow is parallel as well. And all of this is just going to kind of be a little bit darker over here. Then I can kind of go back in. And you can do this cross hatching very close together, or you can do it farther apart. Kind of get an idea of what it is that you think you'd like to do. This is a great thing to just experiment on. I'm really trying to get this more of a middle tone color. So much for my boards, I've kind of lost them, but that's okay. Kind of come in here and experiment with doing different things just to give interest. And then on the door, notice that I've drawn in where my barbed wire is. I'm going to go ahead and put that in where I can see it. Forgot to do it there, but you can always go back in with white paint, which is obviously what I'm going to have to do. Depends on how dark you get this. And then when I put my door in, I'm going to make sure that I leave a little section for my barbed wire. And again, for the door, you know, nothing's ever totally black. So what I'm going to do is try to leave some lighter sections in there. There we go. Here's the bottom of my top of my barbed wire there. And then I'll do my last section down here. Now I drew this out, so my barbed wire may look a little bit different than the one that's on Dad's original. Leave that uneven at the bottom. And then you'll also notice, you know, I guess I'm in a hurry. I kind of forgot to leave my little bites in through here, but I'm going to kind of give you an idea of how to do that over here on this side. Before I start that, I want to go ahead and come back in. I'm going to put in my post. A little bit harder lines to kind of define it. And then I'm going to go in. I know that this side's going to be a little bit darker, but I'm also going to make sure I leave that little bit of a white edge so that when I put my dark in back on the barn, that I don't totally lose. There's my barbed wire. And then as I move over this way, I want to make sure that not only do I leave my barbed wire, but that I also leave my white post here. So let me go ahead and outline that. All right, now this is where we're going to start in with some of this light colored stuff that you see here. And it may be beneficial for you to go in and kind of just draw in where you're going to want to leave some of those lighter areas. If I had done that, I wouldn't have covered that up. Oh well, no big deal. So then what I'm going to do is come back in under that roof. And again, I'm going to kind of draw out my barbed wire so I don't lose it as well. You'll notice at the top of this roof, or excuse me, the top of the shadow, is going to be fairly dark. Not worried about it being solid dark, but it's fairly dark. And then let me go ahead and draw down here as well, so I don't forget that barbed wire. As I come on down this way, I'm going to kind of start leaving or drawing in some of these little light areas to suggest that there's foliage growing up around there. Probably better to leave more than you need. You could always go back and fill in. And then the same thing would apply as you work over this direction. And again, we want to add some interest, so we're not going to worry about doing this solid black. And then again, what I'll do is kind of draw in where my foliage is going to be. And then just kind of start adding in my little white areas. As this comes over, this is all going to be kind of darkened in here. And then didn't leave quite as much light as he did there. So I think what I'll do is when I do this next section, I'll make sure that I do that and just give it a little bit more interest. And again, this bottom part in particular, I'm going to leave fairly light and maybe just break it up a little bit. Since my light's coming from this way, I'll kind of go in and do that dab technique. There we go. Now the nice thing is, anytime you feel like you you did too much, and I'm not going to finish that because I think you all can handle the rest of that. But the nice thing is, if you got too much on here, it's not a problem. You just go back in when you're done. You can use a little bit of Chinese white. I haven't tried white pastel, but you could certainly try that as well. Now these are these bushes that are growing on the outside of the barn. So I'll just kind of come in real dark against the house, because this is going to be very light with all that foliage there. And then we can continue that if we need to. Now this pole is out here on its own, so we're just going to kind of come in, show that pole there. Now to go back in and be able to do in the tree, same principle. We're going to go in and we of course would have our branch here. And then we'll go back in. This tree is in silhouette, kind of like the one color watercolor that you all have done. So what you can do is just kind of come in and pretend like you're putting detail on the tree. If the tree wasn't in silhouette, then obviously we would have it darker on this side over here. And then we would lighten it as it comes over, just to give you an idea. So you still would have some detail, you just don't have it to the extent that you would there. Same thing with the branch. Now notice that this branch is fairly dark right at the base. Etc., etc. Putting branches in, I'm going to make a branch come all the way across the roof. Make it a little bit thicker, give it some interest, vary it in size and shape. Just like that. Now I want to come over here. If I want to put in my foliage here at the top, then I'm just going to come in. Here's the top of my branch. That branch kind of comes down and it goes across the barn. A little bit of pressure on there to kind of have it show up. And again, if you don't like it, if you think it's too dark, you can always go back in and pop a little bit of white paint in there. Now in some of these areas where I don't have foliage, I can make that branch a little bit thicker. You notice I'm just doing it sporadically so it gives it some interest. And then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to start putting in my moss. Now notice I'm going to leave a lot of light showing where the light's hitting. And then I'm going to leave it kind of middle tone, not get too heavy just yet. Then I can kind of come in, make that moss a little bit heavier. Going to put a little bit of foliage in here, and don't forget to leave holes for you know what. Then I'll come back in. There's another big section of moss right through here. And again, we can come back in and darken up those areas to kind of show that. I'm going to put me a little bit of moss right here. Now, moss, remember, kind of typically goes over the top of the branch. And then last of all, this little bit of foliage that we see up and through here. There's a tree that's suggested back here, and you notice all he did was literally just go in. You're suggesting that you've got a tree back there. There's also bushes suggested back here. So I'm just going to kind of come in. You could even make that a little bit darker along the bottom. Show as much detail as you want. Now the same thing over here. You'll notice that I drew myself a light line to kind of tell myself where to draw. I'm going to come all the way down to the horizon. I may make this a little bit darker, not right next to that dark building, but could make it a little darker. And you can even do some suggestions of where the tops of the trees are. Now the last thing that I wanted to show you is how you can come in the front. We're going to come in and add some of this detail that you see. And remember, my tree would be fairly dark down here. Notice that you can do two things depending on how dark your tree is. You can leave areas that would suggest where your barbed wire is coming across. Or you could just go ahead and do the tree in silhouette and just do yourself a harder line. All right, here we go. Let's go in. All of this grass in the front is also very, very silhouetted, and you notice that my post is a little bit darker on the bottom, and it's kind of getting lighter as it goes up. So I'll come in here. Remember that grass never grows the same way. So I'm going to come in here, especially these tall weeds. Bottom of this tree is fairly dark, so I'm not going to worry about showing too much grass underneath here. What I will do is just kind of come in and put a little something under it just to tone that tree down, make it look like it's sitting down on something. And you'll notice there's a lot of this little bitty back and forth stuff that just kind of gives you the suggestion of grass. And then once you do that, you can kind of come in and start darkening up areas. And again, this is when I find it's really helpful to start light and start adding up. Grass is never going to be totally dark across the bottom. So you may have some areas that you want to kind of darken it even more, and other areas that you want to leave light. But the whole point is it's really drawing your eye into the picture. So that should give you a pretty good idea of how to do pen and ink. I did want to show you, this is another one that I'm going to give you with your packet. But this is one that I did this morning, which I just love. You notice the suggested effect in the trees. Again, my values are shown by the deepness of how I use the pen. Very, very light strokes to show light boards, darker strokes for the darker boards. The same thing, notice on the rocks here, everything's following the shape of the rock. So if the rock's angling this way, I'm angling that way. Same thing here, etc., etc. Now, the one thing I did do, which I wanted to show you, I went back in and put a very light watercolor wash on here of Lamp Black. You could really use any color you wanted to use, and again, you could use pastel as well, and just go in with a stump and lightly blend it. But that should give you a good start. I'll have your packet ready for you on Friday, and good luck.